Good evening, and welcome. Thank you, thank you.
Not quite. Sorry.
My name is Tim Knox. I have the honour to be the director here at the Centre for Policy Studies. It's wonderful so many of you are here to hear JP Floru and to buy his book, of course. Before I introduce JP, just a few words about the CPS. A couple of weeks ago we held Margaret Thatcher Conference on Security with Dr. Henry Kissinger and Prime Ministers, royal families, ambassadors from all around the world gathering at the Guildhall, addressing an audience of many hundreds of people. If you weren't there, it was because you're not an associate member of the Centre for Policy Studies, so the theme I might come back to in a second. So do consider that. Last night again we had the great Matt Ridley delivering the Keith Joseph lecture, fantastic speech. Indeed, in that very speech he made the very good, excellent point that there have of course been a number of experiments of free market capitalism against state control. One of course was West Germany against East Germany, and we know which country did rather better. And of course the other was North Korea and South Korea. And I don't think it needs much explanation to show that South Korea has done a tiny bit better than North Korea, maybe more. And you can also, of course, add Hong Kong and mainland China, at least before the impact of the more recent liberalization in China. So, do, of course, please, if you're not already a member, join the CPS. It means you get our pamphlets, you get invitations to our great events, and so on. It's a great pleasure to introduce JP Floru. He'll discuss his book better than I can, but it is a great read. It is very entertaining. He does work for the Adam Smith Institute, which used to work for the Adam Smith Institute. Things get better. He's a Westminster councillor, and he's also a contributor to our CAPEX website, which, if again you don't know, do have a look. CAPEX, www.capex.co. It does try to bring the best of think tank and intellectual thinking on a daily basis to a global audience. So do give that a look. But JP, it's wonderful to see you here. JP will speak for a few minutes and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. I should thank the Centre for Policy Studies first for inviting me to speak tonight. There couldn't really be a more fitting venue for this subject because, as you all know, it was Sir Keith Joseph and the great Margaret Thatcher herself who set up this think tank in 1974 to advance the ideas of freedom, to plead for lower taxes and privatizations and smaller government, which in a way is the polar opposite of what we see today in North Korea. So indeed, if you're not already familiar with the CPS, I would urge you to join them online or leave your email address. So,
Free advertising.
I had not planned to write a book about North Korea when I went. About 15 months ago, 3 London friends asked me to join them to run the marathon in Pyongyang. And I said, all right, yes, I'll gladly come, but I'm not going to run the marathon. I was one of those kids who sat on the bench during PE lessons. And also I didn't fancy having a sports injury and ending up in a hospital in North Korea. So off we went, and they ran the marathon, and then there was a 9 days tour on top of that. And I think it was the end of day 2 that I realized that North Korea truly is the strangest place you can travel to, apart from the moon. It is extraordinary. So they showed us around, and they give us the guided tour. In other words, they showed us what they wanted us to show, especially Pyongyang, the capital, which is a bit of a Potemkin village. It's the window to the world. That's where they built all their best buildings, and at first glance, it's perfectly pleasant. Pyongyang, it's broad avenues, trees, it's clean, and it's orderly. But of course, there are many things they do not show you, and there are also many things they cannot hide from you. So even though they try to only show you what they want, you see lots of other things. But half the time, you do not know what you are seeing. So my book is partly travelogue, and it's written in such a way that you feel as if you're traveling there yourself. But also it is based on research, which I did afterwards, about all the things I couldn't explain, and about which the minders didn't give us any information. So we were, of course, guided around by two guides. We were a group of 15. Two guides showed us around. Guides, in other words, minders. There are two because one keeps an eye on the other one. And so there we were going around, but so half the time we didn't know what we were seeing. For example, at one point we drove on the motorway from Pyongyang due south to the city of Kaesong, which is an industrial city near the border with South Korea. And this was a 5 lanes motorway, 5 lanes in each direction. Which had never been repaired since it was built 30 years ago, so it was full of potholes, and you had to drive very slowly. 5 lanes in each direction, no other traffic. About 100 miles long, no other traffic. And then you find out that in North Korea, to travel from one city or town to another, you need a government permit. And it takes about 3 days to obtain it. So, if you want to visit your mother who is ill and you live in North Korea, you require a government permit. So very few people travel. But it's not only that. On this specific motorway, this was also used for military purposes. So you needed an extra special permit. Because if you think about it, so the 5 lanes in each direction, straight as an arrow, is of course very useful to use as a landing strip for fighter planes. Or in the odd occurrence whereby you may want to send a few thousand tanks down south into South Korea. Another thing on this motorway, so on the side of the motorway, you saw all these people crouching and doing things in the grass on the side of the motorway. They were digging for roots to eat. In North Korea, still about 10% of the population today is malnourished. This is not enough to constitute an official famine by United Nations standards. And of course in the 1990s there was a real famine. We don't know, a real famine which was entirely caused by communist Marxist policies, agricultural policies, and I described that in the book. And at the time, in the 90s, we do not know how many people died, because the government stopped carrying out the census at the start of the famine. We think about 2 million people died from hunger. So, when I went to North Korea, I went for the idiosyncrasies. We've all seen it, all the funny stories about North Korea. We've all seen photos of generals with medals from their neck to their shoes. Or we've seen the strange hairstyle of the great leader Kim Jong-un. By the way, the government prescribes hairstyles. There are a number of, about 10 for men and about 20 for women, allowed hairstyles. So these are the sort of funny stories and the idiosyncrasies. But I went because I'm interested in politics and philosophy. And of course, North Korea is the country in the world with the least freedom. Where people are completely unfree. The state decides everything. The Marxist communist state decides everything. If you are a North Korean, the state decides whether you study, what you study. The state decides where you work, in which part of the country, in what job. The state decides where you live, again, in what part of the country. They decide in which sort of house you live. And then they take care of your spare time as well. Your spare time is not your own either. 3 times a week you have to go to indoctrination lessons, 2 hours, 3 times a week. There is compulsory membership of social associations, for example, trade union or mothers union, with compulsory attendance whereby the collective can keep an eye on you. The only books which are printed are political books, are the works by the great leaders, so the leader and his father and grandfather. Nothing else is available, very little else is available. There are no foreign magazines, no foreign media, so no television, no foreign radio is allowed. Your own house, even in your own house, you are not safe. Every 20 or so households are organized in a sort of residence association. It's called an inminban. And at the head of the inminban stands an inminban Jan, which is typically an elderly, nosy, bossy lady who will keep an eye on everything you do. She keeps a register, writing down who you meet, who goes into your flat, who stays the night. The person who stays the night has to show his or her travel permit to her. She writes this all down. She keeps you in check. She checks whether you actually go to the public demonstrations where you're supposed to go to. In your house, you are obliged to hang a portrait of the leader in your living room on an otherwise blank wall. It has to be hung at an incline, so everybody can see it in the room. It has to be dusted and kept clean. And the state gives you a dust cloth. I do not make this up. The state gives you a dust cloth to keep it clean. And the Inminban Jan will occasionally go into your house to check that you kept the portrait clean. So this is a situation where there is a complete absence of freedom. And I will say a little bit about concentration camps. About 1% of the population is in concentration camps, about 250,000 people. But you could truly say that basically the entire country is a prison camp. And I think speaking and writing about the communist tyranny that is North Korea is very relevant, especially in a time like this, when here in the UK Marxism has again achieved some popularity, especially among people who do not remember the Iron Curtain and the Eastern Bloc, and whose socialist teachers have not told them about the little detail of the 100 million corpses Marxism left behind in the 20th century. And so it is very important to talk about North Korea. Now, I've talked to a few Marxists who are, of course, very embarrassed by North Korea. And so they disclaim it. So they say, it's not really communist. It's not really a Marxist country. Or they say, and even if it was, the tyrannical aspect is nothing to do with communism. That's fascism. Well, no, I'm sorry. It is absolutely a Marxist country. All private property was abolished at the end of the 40s by the Soviet Union. If you try to sell something privately, a little market stall, that is punishable by death. And this is actually carried out, usually in public, with compulsory attendance of the people living in that area. The only way people escape these very strict sanctions is by paying massive bribes to local officials. So it is absolutely Marxist. Tyranny, is it not communist? Well, I would say communism and tyranny are inextricably linked, because if you think about it, if the state is responsible for everything, then everything can be blamed upon the government. And therefore, the opportunity and the incentives for revolt and demonstrations are endless. So if you are a communist regime and you want to stay in power, the only way you will do that is by terror, by terrorizing the population, by having a tyrannical regime. Otherwise, the people will get rid of you in no time at all. Now, but that terror, the terror the regime exercises upon people, was illustrated recently by the case of Otto Warmbier. And you probably all read about it. Otto Warmbier, 22-year-old American student who died about 1 month ago when he was returned to the United States from a North Korean labor camp. He was sent back to die, basically. Now, Otto Warmbier, he was 21 when he was arrested last year in January, which is basically shortly before I went to North Korea. So when he was arrested, my mother was on the phone every day to try to dissuade me from going, because she thought, JP might quite, possibly do something. Every day she was on the phone. Anyway, he was arrested, condemned to 15 years of hard labor for stealing a poster. Now, that sounds very strange, doesn't it? Of course, in North Korea, nothing is ever as it seems. He stole a poster from the 5th floor of the Jangdao Hotel. I stayed in the Jangdao Hotel. It's a 44-floor hotel for tourists in the center of Pyongyang, in the middle of the Tadong River, on an island. So the big hotel for tourists is conveniently located on an island, so you can't escape at night and have a little, wander about in town. Now, in that hotel, the 5th floor, it doesn't exist. So if you're in the lift, there is no button for the 5th floor, because the 5th floor is the spy floor. It's the floor from where an eye is kept on everybody in the hotel, where the cameras and the microphones are monitored from. And so hotel rooms are bugged and there are cameras. A friend of mine actually saw a camera in his room. He found it. And this is from the 5th floor. So it's become a bit of a hobby of international young adventurous travelers to North Korea to try to get onto that 5th floor and take a souvenir or take a photo. So you can Google it. How do you get onto the 5th floor? You go to the 6th floor and then you use the fire escape and you're in. And that is where Otto Warmbier stole the poster from. So why did they come down upon him like a ton of bricks? Like that. Terror. It is to terrorize foreigners visiting North Korea. It is telling foreigners, do as we tell you, or else. And this is how the regime works. They do the same for their own population. They reign through terror. If you make a joke about Kim Jong-un, and it's overheard, and you are arrested, you will be sent to the concentration camp. But not only you, also your family members up to 3 removed. Your parents, your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters, your children, your grandchildren, all carted off to the concentration camp. You're not supposed to come out alive from a concentration camp. So this is how they keep the population in check. Everybody is scared witless. They do the same with generals. Every so often they single out one general for execution, public execution, sometimes in front of, they put him in front of an anti-aircraft gun in a stadium with compulsory attendance of the local population. And this is how the army is kept in check. And then occasionally they kill people abroad, as we possible dissidents, in a spectacular fashion. It's again to exercise terror, as they did with Kim Jong-un's brother, who was killed famously in Kuala Lumpur by throwing a poisoned towel over his head. And that sends a message to dissidents worldwide: we can come and get you wherever you are. And it's after the Kuala Lumpur incident that my mother started to call me again and said, please write your book under a pseudonym, don't put your name on it. So now you then wonder, how does the regime stay in charge? Well, they created a group of supporters, loyal followers. In 1957, Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of the present leader, had every single individual classified into one of three classes: the reliable class, the unreliable class, and the waverers. The reliable class were the communists, were the people who had fought against the United Nations in the Korean War, the loyal followers of Kim Il-sung. The unreliables were people who, perhaps sometimes South Koreans who were stranded in North Korea, or who had fought on the side of the United Nations, or who were class enemies. Basically meaning, if you, before 1945, if you owned any property, you were a capitalist, and therefore a class enemy. So if that could have meant owning a farm, or so a little shop, or a factory, or employing somebody, then you were a capitalist class enemy. Now, that class system is hereditary. You stay in your class, and advantages are handed out by the government in accordance to your class. If you are a reliable class, you will get a nice job, you will probably live in Pyongyang. Unreliable class, not allowed to live in Pyongyang. You live in Pyongyang in a nice flat, and you'll have an all-right life. Food is rationed in North Korea, so you'll get enough food. If you're unreliable class, you will not be allowed to study. You will probably end up in a mine somewhere in the northeast of the country, where it's minus 30 in winter, and you'll probably live in a hovel. There's very little opportunity to rise in class, and a lot of opportunity to go down. For example, if a family member defects to South Korea, and you are reliable class, you're immediately catapulted into unreliable class, and you will be sent to an inhospitable place. So they have a group of people who have advantage in supporting the regime. Finally, I was thinking I should end to give an example of the sort of fear there when you're there in North Korea. I thought I would read two final pages of my book to give you an idea. And it's called Hiding Memory Cards in Bread Rolls. And this is on the train. So we take the train back at the end of the tour, train back from Pyongyang to Beijing. And so we are on the train station, and our minders, Mrs. Kim and Mr. Chong, have brought us to the train station. We are on the train. From the platform, Mrs. Kim and Mr. Chong wave at our dirty windows. The train sets into motion, and they shrink until we can see them no more. Do they believe the propaganda they told us? How will we ever know? Their faces wear masks at all times. Any North Korean would have to be completely bonkers to risk the concentration camp for a few whispered confidences to a foreigner. Over 8 days, you do get some idea as to what your minders are like, of course. Our two seemed more human than the two minders of our shadow group. After a few days, Mrs. Kim loosened up, probably when she realized that we were responsible people who would not cause her too much trouble. As far as I know, none of us tried to elicit unlawful utterances from our minders or anybody we met, and more likely than not, they would have informed on us if we had done so. To some degree, I was even careful with my fellow travelers. How can you be 100% certain that one in the group is not a plant? For a regime obsessed with security, it would be an obvious choice. These are our last hours in North Korea, and everybody is on edge. We have all heard the stories of people being arrested and dragged off the plane or train just when they were about to leave the country. None of us wants to be left behind in the gulag. We have been told that the border officers will be thorough. So it's photo memory card hiding time. As we have been told before we arrived, and almost daily since then, there are heaps of subjects that are officially verboten to photograph. Therefore, you self-censure. Inexorably, every time you take a photo of a perilous subject, you wonder, is this worth being thrown into a concentration camp for? Almost invariably, it isn't. So you don't take the photo. But sometimes the subject is too good to let it pass. Edward, my travel friend, has been taking photos non-stop since we arrived in North Korea and has almost 1,000 of them on 2 memory cards. He also made films with his small, anonymous white camera. I will hide 1 memory card behind the bench, he announces, twinkles in his eyes. He puts something behind his headrest. I now wonder, should he have told me this? What if they interrogate me and pull my fingernails out with dirty surgical instruments? Could I keep his secret? I end up pushing a memory card inside the little bread roll I bought at the train station. I must remember not to eat it. All over the train wagon, similar scenes are occurring. Nobody is walking around. Nobody is chatting. Everybody is trembling for the border inspection. The Korean border guards are all over the train. So this is at the border, arrived at the border. The doors of our wagon are locked and guarded. The toilets have been locked too. One guy in the next compartment urgently had to go to the loo, so his mates leave the compartment so he can do his business in a bottle. 3 soldiers with impressive kepis come into our compartment in turns. One collects our passports, another one the customs declaration, and the third one are exit cards. All electronic devices, books, magazines and phones must be declared. Then a 4th one throws a cursory glance at our luggage and goes through our cameras, photo by photo. We all try to look cooperative and quickly comply with whatever request they come up with. One soldier looks with great suspicion at Hong Kong Edward's little white camera recorder, but he has no idea how to handle it, and so he relies on Edward's fabricated explanation. Fact is that the border guards cannot keep up with technology. The other Hong Konger in our compartment makes the mistake of returning a phone call from his mobile phone during the border control inspection. As we are near the Chinese border, we can use the Chinese network. One soldier sees him and angrily asks him what he's doing. He snatches the phone from the Hong Konger's hand and goes through his messages and emails. You can hear a pin drop. One person on the train is asked to delete photos. He does it right in front of the soldier. What the soldier doesn't know is that there is a backup memory card in his shoe. All of this takes the best part of 4 hours. The last soldier leaving our train manages a wry, laconic smile. The train starts moving. We see a playground with dilapidated rides. 3 children look up at our dirty windows. They don't smile. The train moves over the bridge towards the light. We uncork the bottles. We are free.
Thank you very much indeed. It is an extraordinary mixture of the comic, the comedic, and but above all the tragic. I mean, to say tragic comedy doesn't do enough justice. So, some questions, please. John.
Yes, sir.
Bearing in mind the enormous cost of the Manhattan Project, how does North Korea possibly afford to do what it's doing with ICBMs and the nuclear program?
Yes.
it's got?
The way they pay for it is through foreign currency. So first they need to obtain foreign currency, and then they buy the knowledge or the spare parts from rogue countries. But so how do they obtain the foreign currency? It's one of the chapters in the book. They have a special operations, a special department, which through all sorts of means obtains foreign currency, including the industrial scale printing of fake foreign currency. The $100 note in America has recently, I think a few years ago, been changed because it was faked at an industrial scale by North Korea. So they're also involved in crime, in drug smuggling. They used to do drug smuggling via the diplomatic luggage. They have all sorts of other ways. They hire out their workers So they hire out North Korean workers and bank the salary, and then they pay a pittance back to the workers. They work in Europe. It's in the book. And the Korean workers in Germany, and the companies pay the North Korean state, and then the North Korean state pays them a pittance after they come back, like 5 years later. And so these are all these ways in which they obtain foreign currency.
The last ransomware thing was North Korea.
They do all sorts of things. They are really involved in criminal activities. So that pays for the nuclear program and for the luxuries of the regime. Yes, sir.
If you were in the White House, could you comment on what would be an appropriate policy towards North Korea? I mean, is the Trump approach of more aggression the right approach? I'm not saying it's not, but or is there more diplomacy? What is the policy?
Well, the practice of North Korea over the last 40 years has been they ratchet up tension. There is a lot of shouting back and forth between both sides. And then the West pays them off. So 3 or 4 times in the last 3 decades, they have pacified North Korea with additional aid, food aid, and monetary aid. And South Korea has done that regularly because, of course, they are scared senseless that North Korea will put Seoul into ash. And that has happened several times. So pacifying them doesn't work. They just do it again a few years later, and then they get more aid and more money. Now, as I explained, so the local population is terrorized. They're not going to rebel. They are scared witless. The generals are scared witless. Is the regime going to change by itself, introduce liberal reforms? They have everything to lose and nothing to win. I mean, they nothing to gain. They've seen in Eastern Europe what happens to former communist leaders.
I thought in the book there are some examples of very minor trade liberalization.
Yes,
but
it's usually through bribes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So if you bribe, you can get away with some things. But so it's not going to be internal. It's not going to be the regime itself. It's not going to be the generals. So change will have to come from outside. China, I don't think they particularly like the regime, but it's a buffer against South Korea. It's a buffer against the United States. And I don't think they would like to see South Korea on their border, or American troops on their border. And so they keep North Korea alive to some degree. Almost all trade North Korea has is with China. And the United States, the reality is North Korea cannot win a war. Their population is half the population of South Korea, and because they're a Marxist backwards regime, their technology is can't compete with American technology. They couldn't win a war, but they could cause very, very serious damage on the Korean Peninsula. And of course, in the West, lives matter, and that's, I think, why we haven't intervened yet. But you could say that the country is one big prison camp. And yeah, I think Trump may try something, but I don't know what he's going to do.
Lots of questions, gentlemen there, then Mary.
Hi, good evening. The new president of South Korea, Mr. Moon, I think, has asked the Americans to hold back on installing a new missile system. What inference, how do you see that as playing into the fact that South Korea actually probably doesn't want the Americans to install and be very militaristic?
It's another attempt at pacifying North Korea. It's an attempt at pacifying North Korea.
Yeah, the Americans shouldn't install new missile system?
Well, if South Korea doesn't want it, but I'd be surprised if they didn't want it. Yes, madam.
I was going to ask you what it was like leaving on the train, but you've described that very eloquently, so I wonder, did you go in by train as well?
No, flew in from Beijing. There is a separate little gate in Beijing airport where you go to North Korea, Pyongyang. Everybody has his photo taken there. You go on the plane, and it's a North Korean plane, and it's all clean and orderly, as most things in North Korea. And there's a little screen in the seat in front of you, a little television screen. And it has North Korean propaganda film on a loop. and you cannot switch it off. And it's half an hour, and then it comes back, and it's propaganda film. The great leaders, adulation by the masses, tank columns, a little missile being fired, and then more the leaders, and that's on a loop permanently. So you're
it's just like
immediately in the
Virgin
mood.
Atlantic giving you useful phrases.
Yes, it's a bit like that. So you're immediately in the right mood. And then you arrive at the airport in Pyongyang, which is newly built, very, very beautiful, large airport. And there's nobody else apart from the staff, because they make sure planes do not land at the same time. So you don't mingle with others, presumably. I don't know why. The airport was empty.
Lesson for Heathrow.
It was actually, yes, the main hall was very nice. Compared to Heathrow.
Another question about the marathon. Was this the first time that foreigners had been able to go
No.
and run in the marathon? Why do they allow foreigners to go running?
Well, so they allow it every year, and this year 600 foreigners from all over the world came to run the marathon. The foreigners go there because the idiosyncrasy of it. I mean, it's just the most bizarre thing you can do. Many of these marathon runners run marathons all over the world. But the regime, of course, explains it as these are sympathizers of Kim Jong-un from all over the world who come here to, pay homage to the great leader. That's how they explain it. And so wherever you go, they film you, and then that is then used in propaganda films. So it looks as if non-North Koreans are also supporters of the regime. I made sure to duck occasionally, so I wasn't in the film.
Sorry, so many questions. Kathy, then Charlotte, and then two chats over there.
So Steve Bannon reads your book, which you well may, and we know that President Trump is a little disappointed with the Chinese response.
Yes.
And you find yourself being flown into the White House to advise Mr. Trump on his policy. What would you seriously say?
I would stand strong. I would not pacify them. And ask China perhaps to change the regime by... It may be a regime which is loyal to China, but if it would end the North Korean people being effective prisoners and completely unfree, that would help the North Koreans tremendously.
So do you regard this on a par with, say, in the Second World War, if there'd been a failure to release people from Nazi concentration camps? Is this type of regime on a par with that? It seems to me as
Yes.
you described it.
Yes.
So we will
It
be morally sort of.
There is a moral case for
There's
it,
a moral case.
and of course it's along a country far away about which we know nothing, and that's the thing. That's why nobody's doing anything. But if you think about it, it's a combination of all the worst aspects of Stalinism, Maoism, all the worst you've ever seen. That's all combined in North Korea and being brought to new heights.
Do you think Trump's headed in that direction?
I do not know what Trump is doing. He will stand strong, I'm sure. He won't pacify them, and he shouldn't. It's been tried before, pacifying them.
Charlotte.
I've been to North Korea 3 times, and it's a quite extraordinary country, and I'm very looking forward to your book. But one of the things that when we were there, we were guests of the government there, and there was very little evidence of any understanding of technology and IT and so on. So what I'm interested in is do you think it's really possible, so I haven't been there since 2012, do you think it's really possible that they could do the disruption and the cyber warfare that they've been credited with recently? Because that seems to me like an almost more terrifying thing that they could.
I've read somewhere that they use half their GDP for military purposes. So they keep the country on a war footing. They tell their population that they are still at war with the West, and that only an armistice has been signed, not a peace treaty. So in a way they gather some support, because it's basically saying to the population, the West could invade you any moment now. So we all have to unite around the leader and accept the garrison economy, because the enemy might invade.
But would they be able to go have their IT know-how?
I absolutely do believe that we're the enemy of the people. We're all the enemy of the people. I mean, that's the way they put it.
Yes.
But so I think they feel it's completely legitimate. But I'm asking, do you think they have the capability to have done the things that they've been credited with recently, like disrupting our NHS and the Hollywood attack?
Well,
and so on?
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Yes. They have entire departments which deal with subversion and yes. I do believe that. I mean, their missile system, I don't know, to me it still seems that their missiles do fall in the sea and are never quite very functional. But they could create some disruption, and they can certainly reach Seoul.
Yeah. JP, if you imagine a admittedly unlikely scenario where there's a bloodless regime change, where you've got a population in North Korea of how many people?
24 million.
24 million people who've gone through 3 or 4 generations of profound indoctrination, of mind control, of propaganda, the likes that Orwell wrote about. Do you think that we'd be seeing an entire population screaming for freedom, embracing change, embracing all the values that we hold dear and cherish, or would we actually have to go through several successive generations of cult deprogramming to actually get that population to normative standards of Western society?
Well, when people escape to South Korea, of course, both countries claim that they are Korea, and they govern the entire peninsula. And so, if you're a North Korean, you end up in South Korea, you're automatically a South Korean citizen. And so the South Korean government has these deprogramming courses for new arrivals, and it's 6 months where they are told how to live in a free society. Sadly, many of them then fail in life because they can't adapt. North Koreans have lived under this total tyranny for 75 years with no or very few outside information sources. So quite a few people believe what the regime tells them. Now, in the last 2 decades or so, it's changed a little bit because of technology and DVDs being smuggled into North Korea via China, and DVD players or memory sticks being smuggled. So people in North Korea might have seen a few South Korean soaps. And so the regime then tells them in their weekly indoctrination classes, you may have seen a South Korean soap, but of course that's all fake. It's all, you know, these are specifically made to indoctrinate you and to tell you that the life there is wonderful. And of course North Koreans, they watch these soaps and they see that there are fridges in the backgrounds and everybody seems to have a car. And so they have some inkling that it's not so awful. So the regime also says that outside of North Korea it's worse. So whenever there is a disaster in the West, that will be on North Korean television. If Corbyn organizes a violent demonstration on Trafalgar Square, that will be on North Korean television. You know, the workers, you know, are revolting against the evil capitalist regime. That'll be on television. So they are told that outside of North Korea, it's far worse.
Two, if I may. Is your next book going to be about Venezuela, given Corbyn's seeming liking for that country? And secondly, on a slightly light-hearted note, you would have seen a lot of propaganda, a lot of fake news. How does that compare to George Osborne's Evening Standard's coverage of Brexit?
North Korea and Brexit. Yes, well, it's one of the two heads of the Adam Smith Institute, Eamon Butler, has suggested I should write about Venezuela, and I'm thinking about it. Sadly, I don't speak Spanish, which is a bit of a throwback, but I'm tempted. I'm very tempted. You know, another regime on the way towards glorious communism. The propaganda and how it compares with fake news and the Osborne propaganda machine. In North Korea, it's incredible. So nothing gets printed unless it's approved by the government. To be a writer, you need to be approved by the government. You cannot, as a writer, decide, oh, I'm now going to write about this or that. No, the government tells you what you should write about. Otherwise, your work doesn't get printed. All the newspapers have an inordinate number of photos of the leader, and it's all about the great deeds of the leader. And the television, North Korean television, so they make sure that your television set can't get programs from abroad, and your radio set. Again, all these things are punishable. You can get around that, but if they find out, you go to the concentration camp. So it's permanent propaganda. There is not much else to keep people entertained. Well, they're kept busy in this compulsory membership of organizations. the propaganda is non-stop. I went into a primary school, and they very proudly, in the corridors, this is primary school, in the corridors there were big posters of young guys throwing Molotov cocktails at imperialists and capitalists. This is a primary school. And then there was a class with little yellow chairs. It can only have been for 6-year-olds. And that was where the 6-year-olds got their weekly indoctrination session, where they are taught who their class enemies are. And on the walls, this is where the 6- and 7-year-olds go. On the walls were all these photos of Japanese bayoneting women in the Second World War, and Americans killing babies. This was for primary school children, the most shocking thing we've actually seen. So it is never ending in the West. However overwhelming a certain view in the Brexit debate might be in our media, if I don't talk about the BBC, we still have other media which can put them right. However overwhelming it is, we still have the other view. Over there, they don't.
Thank you very much indeed, everyone. And do join me in thanking